We're diving straight in. On Tuesdays, we start with Nathan Buckley. Bucks, hello to you.
G'day, Gerard. I've just worked out that Tim Watson's deaf because I've just sat in his chair, put his cans on, and it was like the volume's at 11 out of 10.
Blew your ears out.
Yep, so we'll have to work with that.
And the Chief Executive of the AFL, Andrew Dillon, is with us in the studio. Andrew, great to have you here. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, Gerard. Good to see you, Bucks.
Feel like we're in the thick of it?
Yeah, it was a big weekend, a big day yesterday, and it's a massive week for the AFL this week with our opening round up in Sydney, kicking off with Sydney and Melbourne on Thursday night. But even tomorrow, we've got our season launch and a commission meeting and our annual general meeting as well. So a big week for the AFL.
Why are we starting with the opening round? Why are we starting in Sydney and Queensland?
Look, an opportunity came up once I was appointed into the AFL CEO role, meeting with a number of stakeholders and Venues New South Wales, Kerry Mathers up there. We were talking about different content and potentially getting AFL content earlier into New South Wales, and the SCG was available on this weekend, a weekend earlier than normal. So that from there, the idea grew, and then the Gabba became available, and it's really important for us to continue to grow the AFL. The northern states of New South Wales and Queensland, there's big opportunities for us up there, and so far it's looking really good. We've got 4 games that'll be sellouts this weekend, and it's a great start to the season.
Have you felt any pushback in Melbourne, particularly this week, from those who are having a bit of FOMO?
Well, I think there will be a bit of FOMO, but I think what we have seen, it's whetted the appetite for our supporters in Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia, because all ticket sales for round one are looking like they're well ahead of where they were last year, and we're hoping that we may have one of the highest attended rounds ever when we get to round one. So, starting with Richmond Carlton next Thursday.
Obviously, the broadcasters are pretty big stakeholders in that. Are they happy that they've got 4 games out of Melbourne to broadcast back in?
Yeah, I think what happens with the broadcasters, even starting the season that week earlier, gets people interested, and then people just start talking about footy a week earlier than what they would have ordinarily done. And if we can get games in from a broadcasting point of view in clean slot, that means that where they're not up against anyone else, you get more people watching. So it's a tick for the broadcasters, but also a tick for our supporters because they get to watch more games.
Is it a little hint that you will have an organisation that's less, say, Victorian-centric?
Look, I think one of the things that we need to do as a game, we've got a great national competition, but what we need to do as an AFL and as the sport is to turn ourselves into a national game. And we've been investing in New South Wales and Queensland for more than 20 years, and those investments are starting to pay off at community level. We've seen massive growth in Queensland, particularly in the last couple of years, and their participation now in community comps is similar to South Australia, so really growing quickly, and we're seeing the talent coming through the academies. But it's if we can continue to grow in New South Wales and Queensland, it's very good for the code.
You made a statement around $1 billion going into a 10% of gross revenue, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Going back in over the next 10 years. How much responsibility does the AFL take for grassroots football? Obviously, the pathway is something you're interested in to get players through the end. But when there's a whole heap of the population that play footy that aren't going to go and play AFL football, do you take absolute responsibility for how football exists underneath the AFL?
Yeah, it's one of the probably a differentiator for the AFL vis-a-vis other sports in Australia is that it is the responsibility for grassroots footy. Now, where it's not ownership of the footy, it's more like stewarding the game and providing opportunities. In Victoria, we know there's lots of independent leagues that are unbelievably well run, but they work in with AFL Victoria and ultimately the AFL. But what we see as the responsibility for the AFL, it's the right thing to do to invest in grassroots because we want people to be able to play the game in all different forms. But it also makes sense for us to do it because we know that if you play, umpire, coach, or even volunteer at a community club, you're 6 to 7 times more likely to go to a game, watch a game, be a member of a club. So it sort of makes sense for us as well.
And do you think that the allocation of those funds will be like a funding model, like a government would give grants? Do you think, is that the way that you'll do it? Because I presume that there could be a lot of wastage if you just roll money out across the board and you don't know exactly how it's going to be used. You might not get the desired effect.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And what we have been doing since the Commission made that resolution back in August 22 is there's an internal panel that's chaired by one of our commissioners, Andrew Dillon, and that's effectively what happens is that either different states or different leagues or different departments of the AFL put in an application for funds, and they're all assessed and then they're measured once that's happening, and that panel meets every 3 months.
For the non-Victorian teams, Andrew, has there been sort of any gathering or any petitioning around things like not playing very often at the MCG, and whether the premiership is harder to win for a non-Victorian team against a Victorian team, and whether institutionally there's anything that might be done to improve the lot of the non-Victorian sides?
Look, we have been going around talking to all of the clubs, and post the grand final this year, I had a long conversation with Chris Fagan because he's lived a grand final week in Melbourne a number of times when he was at the Hawks, and now he's lived one at the Brisbane Lions. And he identified issues that you have when you're outside of Victoria playing in a grand final, and he's just highlighted them to us. And they're points that we're taking on board, and we're looking at what we can do, given that the grand final is locked in at the MCG for a long period of time, because we want to make sure one of the best things about the AFL competition is the competitive balance mechanism. So we want to make sure once you get to the grand final, everyone's got as equal a chance as possible.
Is what he said to you, did it resonate?
Well, the way that he put it and the things that he raised, and they were things you may not necessarily think of, but it was like coaches and staff members trying to work out how do they get their families down to watch the game, as opposed to when if you're at Hawthorn and you're living in the eastern suburbs, you just catch a tram to the game. So it's like really simple things, but those things can take up a lot of time for an assistant coach during the week. So there were small things, and they're not small, but there was a whole range of things. And so we're looking at them and how we can deal with them in the terms of soft caps and other things.
And the bigger is, if a team's in contention, is there a way to fixture them to the MCG more? So the Lions are in the sweet spot now, but they can't get many more games at the MCG. Is that a worthy venture to consider?
I think they're all worth considering, Gerard. That said, the fixture is a really complicated process as it is, but that doesn't mean that we can't look at it. Josh Bowler, who runs the fixture process for us at the AFL, he's actually done a sort of a 10-minute video of that on the AFL site at the moment to look at all of the fixturing worldwide. There's sort of one company out of Canada that runs it all, and they say that the complexities of the AFL fixture are more than any other sporting organisation worldwide, because we've got multiple clubs sharing venues, and that doesn't happen elsewhere where you've got more than two. So I think it's worthy to look at, but you just have to do it in the context of all the other complexities of the fixture.
Is that a program? Like, do you sort of put it all in and say this is what we're trying to achieve, and then have it spat out like AI, and then make adjustments from there? It must be that complicated.
Yeah, I haven't ever done it. I've sort of seen how it works, and ultimately, you put things in and you weight them. So you start if it has to happen, it starts with 100. So every team plays X games at home, X games away, and then you weight them all down, and it spits out a fixture. And then when you look at it, there'll be complications. Then you've got to, there's got to be X number of games on Foxtel, X number of games on Channel 7. So it's a very complex process.
So Richmond fans will be looking at their first couple of rounds and going, okay, you're throwing us up to the Gold Coast in the heat, and then 5 days later we've got to back up for round one. But I presume that in isolation is a difficult aspect of their draw, but you try and balance it up in other places.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things in the collective agreement that we finalised with the players last year was having some additional 5-day breaks allowed, which then allows for more Thursday night games, which we know the fans have been really enjoying.
The practice games, we've had suspension and serious injury, which sort of half makes me wonder whether they're worth it. Are the practice games still worth it?
Look, I think it's really a question for our clubs, and we have been meeting with a number of the coaches, and I caught up with the South Australian and the Western Australian coaches late last week because they were all over in Adelaide, and amongst the four of them there were varying views. So we'll continue to take that on, but if you look back to when Bucks was playing, we were playing 4 almost full-on practice games, and we're now down to 1 and a bit, and I think that often the trend can continue.
One of the things that was mentioned on Couch yesterday, Jonathan Brown brought it up, the community aspect of the community series. That's obviously an investment in grassroots footy in some shape or form, taking the elite level out. Is that something that you think that we will see again?
Well, I mean, that's one of the most pleasing things, particularly of last weekend, but also the weekend before, was the crowds that we saw at those games. We had a 5 o'clock game at Geelong that had 11,500 people there. Pretty much we were full at Port Adelaide at Alberton. We were as close to full as possible on Sunday at St Kilda, or down at Moorabbin. So that's great, because I think that shows that people love going back to those old community grounds, but there's also just an appetite for the footy to start.
When you do the club meetings, is there anything coming back around the soft cap spend, the footy department spend, and the impact on coaching and recruiting specifically?
Yeah, that's been a consistent theme for a number of years as we've been talking to the clubs, but we made some changes in October last year where we provided for a percentage of the coach's salary to sit outside the cap. I think that's been well received. We've tweaked because it is a soft cap, so there's no obligation. Yeah, there's only just a monetary penalty for a club to go through the cap. You don't get fine draft picks or anything like that. You just pay a tax rate. We've relaxed the tax rates there so that if a club does want to spend through the cap, it's not as punitive as what it was. We'll continue to listen to the clubs as we go on, but we need to balance spending in footy departments with spending on the players, with spending in community and investing for the future.
How do you choose a penalty for tonight to ask for at the tribunal as the AFL in the Jimmy Webster case?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Gerard. What we do is the MRO's assessed it, and it was careless, severe, and high. That is it's 3+. We then look at we'll use this year because we have changed the guidelines over the season, and look at Sam Powell-Pepper from last week, which was asked for the tribunal gave that for. And then you compare that with Powell-Pepper's with Webster's, and you look at what are the differentiating factors, what was the impact on Jai Simpkin versus Kane over in Adelaide, and that all goes into it. And then ultimately it'll be it's a call for Laura Kane and our General Counsel to do that, but they're all the factors that they'll look at.
Is it a significant test case to sort of set your parameters? We've got 4, which was a rise. That was quite clear. This is almost the ceiling. It's hard to imagine a worse incident that will happen in that bracket this year.
I think any time at the start of the year, and particularly after you've changed the guidelines or the rules, the start of the year does sort of it sets a base for the year. So yes, the ones early in the year are really important, but they're also important all the way through the year.
Is the red card any sort of active conversation in AFL circles?
It's not on our radar at the moment. I understand it's a topic of some conversation, but it's not on our radar at the moment, and there will be a substantial sanction for Jimmy Webster tonight, and it served our game pretty well, the system that we've got in place at the moment.
Why is there a reluctance toward a red card?
I just think that it would be a massive change, and I think the other part is that it's not thankfully these types of incidents are sort of becoming rarer and rarer. So I think the pressure that would put on whoever was making that decision to make it in real time, this tribunal, we've had it reviewed by the MRO for a number of hours yesterday. It'll go to the tribunal tonight. Sam Powell-Pepper's case ran for 3 and a bit hours last week. So that's how long we see the process takes to play out, as opposed to either an umpire on the field or someone in the arc back at Marvel Stadium making that call. I think the downsides of that are vast, but as I said, it's not on our radar at the moment.
Dills, if I suggested to you that considering the outcome of an impact or an action has actually been at the detriment of setting standards amongst the playing group, would that follow? Because I think that we've seen some actions now that we're going even harder on, but because potentially the outcome might not have been as severe, well, then the penalty hasn't been severe.
Look, the way the system works, and the current system's been in place for since about 2004 or 5 with the table. There's always been for the majority of it, the 3 factors, and I think the impact on the player that is injured is a relevant factor. So, but we saw last year, early in the year, some actions that maybe previously wouldn't have met the standard for the MRO. And Pickett was one early last year where he was off the ground, bumped into Bailey Smith and got him high. But Bailey jumped straight back up and wasn't affected at all. But Pickett still got a 2-week suspension. And he was probably, it could have been a little bit more than that. So I think it's a changing, the changing standards and expectations of the community. And we as a competition have to evolve to at least be meeting them and hopefully be a step ahead.
So obviously you're not in a position to do this, but say I projected forward to, say, an 8-week penalty to Webster. So Cozzy Pickett's was probably the closest, the player that he's going to put pressure on. He's kicking, jumps off the ground, collects him shoulder head, although maybe Webster and Simpkin contact was a little cleaner and Simpkin had a greater impact. But that's a 2-week suspension 12 weeks ago for a very similar action to something that we might get 3 or 4 times more 12 months later. Has the community standards shifted that quickly?
Well, I think what it shows is that, and I'm not saying, because that you've sort of extrapolated straight out to 8 weeks and 2, but but if we sort of said the expectations have changed, and I think they probably have. I mean, the understanding about concussion and the effects from that, where everyone's learning, and the community understanding of that has increased. We've had class actions. We've got other aspects that we're looking into. So I think it has evolved. Whether it's that the percentages that you're talking about, I'm not sure, but it certainly has.
How much do you feel responsible to educate the public and us, the media, so that we can help educate the public around the issue of concussion and repeated head knocks versus what you can actually talk about?
Look, it's one where, and we've been lucky enough to be able to meet with all the Fox Footy commentators last week and the Channel 7 ones the week before to give a bit of a flavour about what we're thinking. But I think on any topic, the more that people can be educated, the better. And we've got 6 people at the AFL working effectively full-time on concussion and the health of our players. And so they're out at the clubs at the moment meeting with the players and educating them and educating the clubs. And we've got amazing doctors at all of the clubs who are also educating. So the playing group are well informed. And we're also now, through the advent of technology, being able to get that information out through to all of our community leagues as well.
Respecting the process that you've put in place around Alastair Clarkson and the Please Explain, what is the scope of penalty for such a moment involving a senior coach, be it from fine to what?
It's a really good question, but we've got the process running out now, and under the AFL rules, the sort of sanctions are at large. But if you go back through the history of coaches and officials making comments at breaks in play, we're looking at sort of in the territory of fines. But I think education's also really important in these aspects as well, particularly given, in this instance, what's alleged to have been said.
Have you ever had cause to think about either suspending a coach from attending a game, as has happened in other sports, or excluding them from the field of play, which I know Tim and Gary were talking about?
Look, we haven't had that. Well, I've been at the AFL for well over 20 years, and that hasn't come up and hasn't been in our contemplation in that time.
I want to take you to umpiring, and where are we at currently at community level with umpires? I get the sense that we're a little bit skinny there, and that would be a concern for you going forward.
Yeah, I mean, umpiring. The one thing you can't have a game without umpires. Mm-hmm. And we've had enormous growth in our participation over the last number of years, particularly with women and girls taking up the game. And our umpiring hasn't kept pace with the rate of participation. So it's really important for us to continue to attract umpires. And we actually haven't had, the trouble hasn't necessarily been in attracting boys and girls, men and women to come and umpire. It's been about retaining them in the system once they try it. So what we're working on at all levels of the game is making sure if you come and umpire that the experience you have is as good as it can be, because it is I did it for 7 years when I was at school and university. It's really hard, but if you get it right, it's actually really rewarding as well. So we want to make sure that we can attract as many people as possible to sort of take it up. And in particular, we've seen a couple of pilots at a local club near me that Steve McBurney, former AFL umpiring great, has run a program at his local club, and they've ended up having to expand it out and get boys and girls in from all of the other clubs. So, as I said, it's really rewarding. It is hard, but I think when things are hard, the rewards are great as well.
Yeah, I think in umpiring we need to consider changing community standards there as well, or changing community attitudes. There's a lot of people now are more willing to voice displeasure at a position of authority than they ever have 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think the umpires are going to cop even more criticism at times or be scrutinised even more. But I'd love to see the experienced umpires. I mean, obviously, if Steve McBurney's running a program, that's excellent. But he can only do it as a multiple of one. If he had to access, or Ray Chamberlain, and I think Ray does when he does his pieces, in media, I think it's excellent. I'd love to see the profiles of the senior umpires, men and women, raised even greater to be aspirational for those that are coming through. I think we need to humanise the umpires as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, I think it's really important that that umpiring is seen to be aspirational, and I think it is within the cohort of the men and women that are within that cohort. They do see, but we need to make sure that the pathways are clearer and that we're appealing to as broad a range of people as possible, because, as I said right at the start, you can't have a game without umpires, and we need, at community level, we need more men and women, boys and girls to umpire just so that we can get the games going. And then at the elite level, as our AFL male players, but also our AFLW players, as they become more professional, as the game gets faster, well, we need our umpires to keep pace with that.
What is their feedback around the difficulty or otherwise of actually umpiring the game at the moment?
Well, I think we brought in the 4-umpire system last year, and that provided a layer of complexity because we brought it in and it was different to what we'd been having, for a number of years previously with the 3 umpires. But what we did see with the 4 umpires is the physical load on the umpires, like the actual kilometres covered, dropped by about 25%. But importantly, the absolute, because they're GPS monitored the same as the players, they're running at the extreme, at their highest pace was way down. So that enabled the umpires to be less physically exhausted. So hopefully, but they could get to the positions to make the decisions. And also what we did see a number of times was an senior umpire being able to umpire on a Thursday night and then follow up on a Sunday. So if we can get our best umpires out there umpiring more often, I think that's a tick. And at the same time, we expanded the list from 34 to 42. So we got 8 new umpires into the program, and they got to, like on an AFL list, they got, maybe they got games not before they were ready, but they got an opportunity that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And I think that expands the pool, which is really important.
A 9 out of 10 bouncer and a 7 out of 10 decision maker versus a 6 out of 10 bouncer and a 9 out of 10 decision maker. Which one do you choose?
I think that's easy. The decision
maker.
It
should be, shouldn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the bounce is it's an historical part and it's a traditional part of the game. But what's really important for the umpires and what we want to do within the umpiring department is get the best decision makers out there, because that's what really matters.
How close are you to securing the Devils for Tasmania and the intricacies behind the scenes?
Look, the Tassie Footy Club have got a big announcement on the 18th of March where they'll be announcing the nickname and the colours, amongst other things. They will be holding events all across Tasmania. I think there were 6 sites identified. 2 of them sold out within 5 minutes yesterday when tickets went on sale. So I understand there might even be a 7th and potentially even an 8th site where that launch will be made. There's some complexities with that nickname that you raised. It has been very popular, but I think it's a wait and see for the 18th of March.
Okay, no spoilers. Thursday nights are scheduled to round 13, and then you've got 2 other rounds that are set. What's the chances of more Thursday nights in the back end of that season?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gerard. What we've seen in previous years where we've played between sort of 9 and 11 Thursday night games is they've been really popular from a TV point of view, and the attendances have held up. This will be the longest continuous stretch of Thursday night games that we've seen. So we want to assess how they go, and when we set the fixture for the second part of the year, which will be after about round 9 or round 10, we'll have a really good idea how the Thursday nights have gone, and there is a potential for more, but it might be that we go back to more of the traditional Friday to Sunday. But we'll, it'll be how they're attended and how they're viewed.
Yeah, so very specifically around feet on the ground and eyeballs on the screens.
Absolutely, and also the other complexities around the fixture of 5-day breaks and the like.
Yeah, and the US. So we just saw the NRL spectacularly in Vegas. Cricket's about to, it's establishing a foothold in the US, both through its domestic T20 competition, but really through the World Cup. Is there an opportunity there with those ovals with infrastructure? Is there an opportunity for the AFL?
I think there's opportunities for the AFL in lots of places. And it might be that the US is one, but there's also massive opportunities for us in the western suburbs of Melbourne and all through New South Wales and all through Queensland. One of the things that we want to grow our community participation from just over 500,000 to over 1 million in the next 8 to 10 years. And we will do that with a focus on our heartland states, but also New South Wales and Queensland, but also looking at alternative formats and taking the game to different places.
What did we learn from the China experiment or taking games away that you've got in your back pocket to consider, international expansion?
Well, I mean, the one thing that we did learn about China was it's a big exercise, and you've got to be all in investment wise, because it's not a cheap exercise to move big groups of players and officials around the world. We have also the added thing of there's not as many ovals as there are rectangles around. So what's really important anywhere you take a game is that you've got the right facilities. You've got to have, number one, the right surface, and then you've got to have facilities for the spectators, and then we've got to be able to play it in a time zone that plays back into Australia. So they're all the things that you take into account. But the other part would be you wouldn't move a game anywhere just for the sake of moving the game. It would have to be part of a broader plan and a broader play.
What are you looking forward to, Andrew? 2 days out from the start of the season. What does 2024 hold in store for you?
Look, I'm just really looking forward to the footy starting. I'm the season we had last year with record attendances of over 8 million people, but was incredible. But the way the footy was played and the way it was so even and unpredictable and the style of play, and I'm just really excited to see the evolution of that. I wouldn't be surprised if there was there wouldn't be a supporter of any club that doesn't have hope at the moment. And, you might be near the bottom of the ladder, but I think you've drafted well and you'd be wanting to see your young players evolve. I think any of the teams that were just out of the 8 would think that they're a massive chance to stay in or to get in. And then all the teams that were in the 8 would be hoping to push further. So I'm just looking forward to a great style of game, but really just looking forward to the game starting.
Yep, you've got a lot of friends on that front. Andrew, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Gerard. Thanks, Bucks.